New Zealand is a country that most people think they understand. 3.5 million square kilometers of national park, coastline, rainforest, volcano, and ocean. A country that looks, at first glance, like the entire planet edited down to its best parts. But then there are the places you are not allowed to go. Not because of bureaucracy. Not because the trails are muddy. There is an island in Cook Strait where, in 1894, a lighthouse keeper's cat drove an entire bird species to extinction within a single year. And that same island today holds 30,000 living creatures that have existed since the age of the dinosaurs. There is a rainforest in the North Island that the New Zealand Parliament voted to grant legal personhood in 2014, making it the first natural feature in world history to legally own itself. And there is a volcano in the Bay of Plenty that was open for tourist visits 7 days a week, right up until a clear December afternoon in 2019 when it wasn't. That is number 1 on this list. You will want to stay. These are the 13 forbidden places in New Zealand you are not allowed to visit. Let's go. Number 13. The Bounty Islands. The islands that belong to the birds. They are 22 granite outcrops in the Southern Ocean, 700 kilometers east of New Zealand's South Island. There are no beaches, no soil, no trees. Nothing grows here except lichens and a thick crust of seabird guano that coats every surface. The total land area is 135 hectares, smaller than many farms. Landing is prohibited under the 1977 Reserves Act. In practice, most vessels cannot approach anyway. The Southern Ocean makes that decision on its own. What sets the Bounty Islands apart is not their emptiness, but their completeness. These islands have never been invaded by rats or mice. Not once. Their sheer inhospitability, too steep, too wave-battered, too guano-soaked for a 19th century sealing camp to take hold, meant that every species here has remained exactly as it was before humans arrived anywhere in the Pacific. Captain Bligh named them in 1788, 9 days after the mutiny on the Bounty. They are part of a UNESCO World Heritage Site. You cannot visit. You cannot land. The birds are not waiting. Number 12. The Snares. The last perfect place. Of all the places in New Zealand you cannot visit, the Snares hold the most absolute distinction. They are the only subantarctic island group in the world that has never had a terrestrial mammal introduced. No rats, no cats, no mice. When 19th century sealers swept through the Southern Ocean, they left land predators everywhere they established a camp. The Snares, 200 kilometers southwest of Stewart Island, had no easy harbor, no gentle landing. The sealers took fur seals from the water and moved on. That single accident of geography left the islands intact. 2 million pairs of sooty shearwaters breed here across 340 hectares. 3 bird species, the Snares crested penguin, the Snares fernbird, the Snares tomtit, exist on these islands and nowhere else on Earth. The peat soil is so riddled with shearwater burrows that a researcher stepping off the path can punch through the surface and sink thigh-deep into the tunnel system beneath. Zodiac cruising is permitted. Landing is not. Captain Vancouver named the Snares in 1791 as a hazard to shipping. He was right, just not in the way he meant. Number 11. Campbell Island, the world's loneliest tree. 600 kilometers south of the New Zealand mainland, at 52 degrees south in the furious 50s, Campbell Island receives 325 days of rain each year and gale-force winds on 100 of them. The meteorological station that kept a small team on the island closed in 1995. Since then, the island has been uninhabited. It holds one tree, a Sitka spruce, planted around 1901 by Lord Ranfurly, then Governor of New Zealand, as the opening move of a forestry industry that never arrived. For decades, the station staff cut the top off each Christmas to use as a holiday tree, giving it a cauliflower shape. It has never produced cones. Scientists describe it as permanently juvenile. The nearest other tree is more than 220 kilometers away, on the Auckland Islands. This one is officially the most isolated tree on Earth. In 2013, researchers drilled a core from the trunk. Inside the growth rings, sealed in wood at the bottom of the world, was a radiocarbon spike from above-ground nuclear weapons testing peaking in 1965. The loneliest tree became an accidental archive of the Anthropocene. A permit is required to visit. Given the weather, the permit is likely the easier part. Number 10. The Auckland Islands. The graveyard at the edge of the world. These are the largest of New Zealand's subantarctic island groups, lying roughly 460 kilometers south of the South Island. They have been killing ships, settlements, and ambitions for as long as humans have been visiting. So many vessels wrecked along the coast that the New Zealand government established emergency provision depots in the 1880s, stocked with food and tools for castaways. Those depots are still in the bush, largely intact. In 1864, the Grafton wrecked here. 5 survivors spent 19 months on the islands, built a vessel from salvage, and sailed it to civilization. When they reported where they had been, rescuers returned. They found the provision depot completely untouched. No one had thought to look for castaways this far south. Polynesian settlement evidence from the 13th century has been found on Enderby Island. A resettlement attempt in the 1840s found conditions unsurvivable. A European farming colony in the 1850s also failed. Today, permitted expedition landings are available at designated sites. The rest is off limits. Pigs, cats, and mice remain on the main island and cannot be removed. Every attempt at permanence here has received the same answer. Number 9. The Antipodes Islands. The island the British wanted to nuke. The most remote piece of New Zealand sovereign territory lies 860 kilometers southeast of Stewart Island. No landing is permitted. The only way to see the Antipodes is from a zodiac, floating offshore in conditions that are frequently hostile. Here's the thing. In 1955, the British government needed a site remote enough to test thermonuclear weapons. The Admiralty initially proposed the Antipodes Islands. New Zealand's Prime Minister received a formal letter from the British Prime Minister requesting permission. The Antipodes were passed over only because the Kermadec Islands, further north, were judged slightly more convenient. 3 bird species exist here and nowhere else on Earth: the Antipodes parakeet, the Reischek's parakeet, the Antipodes snipe. The islands are home to approximately half the world's erect crested penguins. In 2016, the Department of Conservation dropped 65 tons of rodenticide bait from helicopters to eradicate an estimated 200,000 mice. The last vessel known to have wrecked here was the yacht Totoroa in June 1999. 2 people died. 60 years earlier, the British government wanted to place a hydrogen bomb test site in roughly the same location. The penguins are still there. Number 8. The Waitakere Ranges. The forest that locked itself. The Waitakere Ranges, Te Wau Nui o Tiriwa, cover 16,000 hectares on Auckland's western edge. Before 2018, roughly 1 million people visited each year to walk the ancient Kauri forest tracks. Without knowing it, they were carrying microscopic spores of Phytophthora agathidicida on their boots, moving infected soil from one part of the forest to another. Kauri dieback invades kauri root systems and stops the trees from absorbing nutrients. The trees die. There is no cure. By 2018, 20% of kauri in the ranges were infected, up from 8% in 2011. The spores can survive in dried mud on a hiking boot for at least 8 years. In December 2017, the local Iwite Kawerau Amaki placed a rahui over the entire forest, a traditional Maori prohibition invoked here as tapu. A place contaminated by illness, placed off limits until it can recover its mori. Auckland Council followed in May 2018 with legal enforcement. One person was fined 4,500 New Zealand dollars for repeatedly entering closed tracks after multiple trespass notices. The estimated cost of the closure and restoration program is over 123 million New Zealand dollars across 10 years. There is no confirmed date for full reopening. A forest so sick it had to close itself to the people who were killing it. If you're enjoying this so far, drop a comment. Which of these surprises you most? From here, the list gets considerably heavier. Number 7. Poor Knights Islands, the world's greatest dive site you can't touch. Jacques Cousteau rated the Poor Knights Islands one of the 10 best dive sites in the world. The marine reserve around them, established in 1981 and upgraded to full no-take status in October 1998, covers 1,890 hectares. In the 4 years following full no-take protection, snapper biomass inside the reserve increased by 818%. Large snapper populations grew 7.4 times. Rico Sea Cave, accessible by kayak from the water's edge, is one of the largest sea caves in the world. You may dive here, you may snorkel, you may kayak into the cave. The islands themselves sit 22 kilometers off the Northland coast. You may not land. The islands were inhabited by Ngati Wai Maori until the early 19th century, when a raid by a rival iwi wiped out the community. In the aftermath, a tapu was placed on the islands by Maori, a sacred prohibition that has never been lifted. They have not been resettled since. Subtropical fish species found nowhere else in New Zealand, spotted black grouper, mosaic moray, Lord Howe coralfish, move through water above ground that has had no human footprint in over 2 centuries. When the Marine Reserve was created in 1981, it reinforced a restriction that was already a century old. The law eventually caught up with what Maori already knew. Number 6. The Kermadec Islands, Rangitawa. The Department of Conservation's page for the Kermadec Islands contains the following line: recreational permit applications are not being considered. Only approved scientific research may visit. The islands lie between 800 and 1,000 kilometers northeast of New Zealand's North Island, in the direction of Tonga. Raoul Island, the largest at approximately 29 square kilometers, holds a small dock field and weather station. That is the only human presence in the archipelago. The other islands are completely uninhabited. The Kermadec Trench, running along the eastern edge of the group, is one of the deepest ocean systems in the world. Raoul and Curtis Islands are active volcanoes. In 2015, the New Zealand government proposed a 620,000 square kilometer ocean sanctuary around the islands, one of the largest marine protected areas ever announced. Fishing companies and iwi legal challenges blocked the legislation for nearly a decade. In March 2024, the coalition government scrapped the proposal entirely. One footnote: in the 1950s, the British government wrote formally to New Zealand's Prime Minister requesting permission to test hydrogen bombs at the Kermadec Islands. New Zealand refused. This makes the Kermadecs the second New Zealand island group the British asked to borrow for nuclear weapons testing. The sanctuary is gone. The restriction remains. The volcanoes continue without comment. Number 5. Te Hauturu Otoi, Little Barrier Island, New Zealand's original forbidden island. Here is a number: 600. That is the maximum number of people permitted to land on Little Barrier Island in any given year, in a country of 5 million people, with the island sitting 80 kilometers north of Auckland. The permits are issued only for cultural, management, research, or educational purposes, not recreation, not tourism. Te Hauturu Otoi became New Zealand's first nature reserve in 1895. It covers 3,083 hectares and has been described as the most intact native ecosystem in New Zealand. It shelters over 400 native plant species and roughly 40 species of rare or endangered birds. Feral cats were eradicated between 1977 and 1980 in what was described as one of the country's costliest pest control programs at the time. Polynesian rats were eliminated by aerial poison drops in 2004. Kakapo, the world's heaviest parrot, critically endangered, were housed here as part of their recovery program. The island was seized from its Ngati Wai and Ngati Manuhiri owners in 1894 through Crown legislation designed specifically to acquire it after the Maori owners refused to sell. Residents were forcibly evicted in 1896. In 2011, through a treaty of Waitangi settlement, the island was returned to Ngati Manuhiri. 7 days later, they gifted it back to all New Zealanders. A colonial seizure? A modern redress? A voluntary re-gift? And still almost nobody can go there. Number 4. Takapurewa, Stevens Island, the island that killed the last of its kind. In 1894, a lighthouse keeper on Stevens Island allowed his cat to roam freely. The cat began bringing home dead birds, small, flightless, unlike anything recorded in ornithological literature. Researchers wrote asking for specimens. The lighthouse keeper sent them dead birds. That was the only kind available. Before a single specimen was examined alive, before any scientist had seen this species breathing, the last one was gone. The Stevens Island wren was discovered and eradicated within a single year. Every specimen science ever collected was a dead bird brought in by a cat. The same island holds 30,000 tuatara, roughly half the world's wild population. Tuatara are the sole surviving members of an order of reptiles that flourished 200 million years ago. The rest of that order went extinct 60 million years ago. The tuatara did not. They are still here, on Stevens Island, in Cook Strait, moving across the grass at night, in the dark, unchanged. No public access is permitted. The lighthouse, built in 1894 and automated in 1989, still operates. The island was appropriated from its Ngati Koata owners under the Public Works Act in 1891 to build that lighthouse. It is now managed jointly by Ngati Koata and the Department of Conservation. The lighthouse keepers who sent the dead specimens also noticed the tuatara. They lobbied the colonial government for protection in 1895, making the tuatara one of the first creatures in New Zealand to receive legal protection. One extinction. One salvation. Same island. Same year. The cat started both. Number 3. Te Urewera, the forest that owns itself. In 2014, the New Zealand Parliament passed a law unprecedented in world history. It gave a forest legal personhood, not metaphorically. Under New Zealand law, Te Urewera, 821 square kilometers of ancient mist-draped North Island rainforest, became a legal entity with the same rights and responsibilities as a corporation. The forest owns itself. Te Urewera is the homeland of the Tūhou people, known as the Children of the Mist, who trace their origins to Hinapuka-Hurangi, the Mist Maiden, and Te Monga, the Mountain. Tūhou refused to sign the Treaty of Waitangi in 1840 and maintained effective sovereign control of the forest for decades. The Crown responded with a scorched earth military campaign in the 1860s. Between 1915 and 1926, a process historians have described as a predatory purchase campaign stripped approximately 70% of the Tūhou homeland. In 1954, the forest was declared a national park, locking Tūhou out of their own territory under conservation law. In 2014, after 180 years of resistance, the settlement came. Rather than return the land to Tūhou ownership, which would have required dismantling decades of conservation legislation, the government and Tūhou built something the world had never seen. A board of both Tūhou and Crown representatives now manages the forest on behalf of the forest itself. The Te Urewera Act passed with near-unanimous support. It is the largest remaining area of primeval forest in the North Island. It is also a legal person. Visitors are welcome. The forest sets the terms. Number 2. Waihopai Station, the spy base in the vineyard. The Waihopai Valley, near Blenheim, is wine country. Dry hills, clear skies, rows of grapevines running to the horizon. In the middle of that landscape, on 30 hectares of stony ground behind a razor wire perimeter, is a government signals intelligence facility that has been operating since 1989. The Waihopai Station is run by New Zealand's Government Communications Security Bureau, the GCSB. It is part of the Echelon Network, the global surveillance arrangement shared among New Zealand, the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, and Australia. Documents released by Edward Snowden in 2015 revealed the station's NSA codename, Iron Sand. They showed it had been intercepting phone calls, emails, and text messages across the Asia-Pacific and feeding the data directly into NSA databases. The station was authorized in 1987 by Prime Minister David Lang, who later said he had not fully understood what he was agreeing to. The two iconic white radome covers, the spherical structures that gave the base its distinctive appearance, were decommissioned and removed in 2021 and 2022. The base remains fully operational. In 2024, New Zealand's Inspector General of Intelligence and Security, found that the GCSB had improperly hosted a secret American intelligence system codenamed Apparition at Waihopai from 2012 to 2020 without ministerial approval. Apparition had been developed for NSA capture-kill drone operations. The Inspector General found that senior GCSB officials had negligible awareness of it, and that staff were following instructions from a foreign agency without asking questions. You can see the facility from the public road. Entry is strictly forbidden. The vineyards on the other side of the fence have no idea. Number 1. Whakaari, White Island. The volcano that was never safe. The Bay of Plenty is calm on most days. From the coast near Whakatane, you can see the island 48 kilometers out, a low, smoking shape on the horizon, a continuous white column rising from it against the sky. Closer in, the smell arrives before any detail does. Sulfur, sharp and acrid, on the open water. The crater walls are gray and ochre and yellow, stained by acid and years of gas. Rusted metal structures sit near the crater floor, the remains of a sulfur mining operation wiped out by an earlier eruption and never rebuilt. The crater lake holds a color that does not exist in nature. Before December 2019, you could buy a ticket, board a boat in Whakatane, and be standing on that crater floor 90 minutes later. Whakaari lies 48 kilometers offshore. It is approximately 70% underwater. What you see above the surface is the top of an active stratovolcano. It erupted continuously from 1975 to 2000. It erupted in 2012. It erupted in 2016. Nobody died. The monitoring was rigorous. Tour operators ran the crossing daily. On December 9, 2019, the volcanic alert level was 2, moderate to heightened unrest. Visitor landings were permitted at level 2. 47 people were on the island. The eruption lasted approximately 2 minutes. 22 of them died. The bodies of 2 victims were never recovered from the crater. They have been officially declared dead. Here's the detail that stays with you. When the eruption column rose, emergency authorities ordered rescue helicopters not to fly. The tour boat captains who had just departed with their previous group of passengers turned their vessels around and went back to the crater floor. They pulled survivors off the ash-covered ground while the island was still venting. Of the 25 survivors, most owe their lives to people who ignored the official order. The helicopters stayed offshore. The boats went in. The island is still active. GNS. Science monitors it remotely. In December 2022, a small group including family members of victims returned to place a memorial plaque. The 2 who were never recovered are still somewhere in the crater. In March 2024, 6 defendants were ordered to pay 10.21 million New Zealand dollars in reparations and 2 million New Zealand dollars in fines. Whakaari is still privately owned. It is still steaming. No landing is permitted. The volcano was always an active volcano. The tragedy was in treating it as though it were anything else. New Zealand has spent more than a century protecting what it has. Its islands, its forests, its oceans, and its history. The breadth of what you cannot enter here is its own kind of measure of what still remains worth protecting. For me, it is Stephen's Island. 1 cat, 1 extinction, and 30,000 living relics of the dinosaur age on the same patch of rock in the same year. That one is not going to leave me alone. Which of these surprised you most? Leave it in the comments, and if you want more like this, subscribing keeps them coming.